Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Tony Jones from One Nucleus. You'll probably be sick of the sight of me by the end of this hour, but I'll start off and tell you who I am at least. Um, so thanks for everyone joining us today, and thank you in particular to our panelists and others in the background who've helped get to this point. So for One Nucleus, we're a member-led organization, and traditionally out of that, we try and respond to and preempt and try and address some of the gaps and holes that our members find difficult. But generally, we haven't been involved in lobbying. That's very much we saw as domain of groups such as BIA and ABPI and the national trade bodies, not least because it's resource intensive and specialist, and that's not what we have kitted ourselves up to do. And also the fact that I've always felt that government wants one clear voice going into it rather than five or six kind of similar but slightly different messages, which just becomes noise. And I don't know what a policy lead is meant to do with that, because they aren't necessarily a specialist. But actually, we ended up here today because there was a group that came to me of concerned biotech people, which at the time then was Matthew Fife, Natasha Robbins, Hazel Jones, and Dave Graham, basically saying, look, we've seen all these levels of redundancies, we've seen colleagues or ourselves being affected, but no one seems to be talking about it. How can we provide a voice to that if it's not being picked up as yet or dealt with? And there seem to be concerns, and most are on the panel that can make it today, so they can tell me if I've abridged this wrongly at some point. But it was basically around, there was loads of concern, there wasn't a voice for those concerns necessarily, and there wasn't a feeling of urgency that anybody was really listening to what was happening in our sector. So clearly that's a concern for us as One Nucleus and our members too. So I was more than happy to try and support by helping provide a platform or a mechanism to build momentum and visibility into that discussion and get us all thinking a little bit harder about it and thinking about what could we do that's going to change this trajectory. And then other passionate people about it, there's clearly on the call today, but others in particular, then Shuli and David Montgomery came along and they've done a report and they looked at a slightly different part of where we'd been talking about, but it all fitted together. And then Simon Leonard came along, another passionate advocate for the sector and also concerned. So that's where we've ended up. It's a case of there are reports out there, and equally, is there anything being done soon enough to help a lot of those people who are directly affected by this and the companies and hence the wider sector? And how do we keep that conversation live and gain momentum so that it does resonate in the policymaker and policy influencer circles to help us sort this? So with that in mind, that's how we've ended up with the webinar today. And I guess just to set the scene from my perspective, a couple of housekeeping things. If people would like to keep their microphones on mute when they're not speaking, with this many on the call, it could get quite noisy. The chat box is open, so I would encourage anybody to put comments, thoughts, questions, etc. in the chat box. As the moderator, I'll try and keep an eye on that and bring in people or go to that as I get the opportunity. And we have an hour, it'll fly past. We are recording the session, so we'll circulate a recording of the session post-event. And I guess as well, to set some of the criteria, in my mind, here today, we're primarily talking about the biopharma space rather than the whole of life sciences, which can be quite diverse and have very different needs across different bits of the sector as well. Some common things, but some are very different. As I say, we're not a lobby group, so I'm hoping what comes out of today is maybe some next steps that we would like to ask others to pick up the baton on, or things that we can do ourselves to encourage that to happen. And I'll try and round out with that towards the end of the webinar. But, I look at the financing report from BIA, which is a great report each quarter, and it looks like funding was going up at the end of last year and lots of optimism into 2026 and around JPM. I read other reports and I see deals going through, and it looks like companies are doing really well in some cases, a lot of haves, a lot of have-nots. And, everybody seemed to be upbeat. Yes, IPOs were happening back on NASDAQ. That's been a bit of a glitch in that since the disturbance in the Middle East has been triggered. But then I look out of my office window on the science park and the real world doesn't look like I'm reading on the screen. I'm seeing too many empty labs. I'm seeing people really finding it hard. And and it's kind of a bit like going into Harry Potter world where the same rules don't apply anymore to what I thought they were. So that really intrigues me as to why things aren't translating from money being raised into job creation, economic development. So I guess with that, we can have a couple of short presentations first. One from Natasha Robbins, who's been tracking a lot of the redundancy activity we're seeing in the sector, and then David Montgomery, who's been with Shuli Porkis, has written and published their report around what needs to be fixed in some of these things. So I'm going to try and be quiet against all of my instincts and allow Natasha to speak.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Natasha, founder of Biotech Search. I work closely with biotech founders, VCs, and leadership teams to build senior teams, but at the same time, I'm also speaking with candidates, navigating the market every day. So I'm sitting really probably in the middle of what's actually happening across hiring, the funding pressure, and talent movement. And that's what I'll share today. So everything I'm sharing comes directly from what I'm seeing on the ground, and not just reports and headlines.
We're giving away the punchline here with this slide.
Yeah, but yeah, I want to use these minutes to really focus on what's actually happening, and not what we might think is happening. So over the past, I would say probably 12 months now, I've been tracking the redundancy data across the UK, the biotech ecosystem. It started from what I was seeing more, just day to day in my work. More candidates, more urgency, more uncertainty, and it just became clear that it wasn't sort of just an isolated sort of incident. So I decided to start collecting and building on that data. One of the sort of the main headlines is at least 3,000 people now have been made redundant across the UK biotech in the past 18 months. And that's based on disclosed, verified data sort of only. The real number is probably much higher, significantly higher, probably, in fact. And I'll explain why on that in a moment. But just to try and sense check things, sort of late last year, I did run a LinkedIn poll, and I had over 500 responses from that. There was over 378 UK professionals in biotech reported redundancy in either 2024 and 2025. So this isn't noise or anything like that. It is, it is what's happening in the market right now. How do I move on to my next slide? There we go. Thank you. So this is sort of a bit of a tracker, so you can see where the redundancies happened. So when you look at timing, there's a clear sort of trend. We saw around, I think it was 25 company level redundancy events in 2024. And that rose up to 43 in 2025. And in 2026, we are already adding to that. We're just a few months in. And actually, my data currently as it stands, if we go on the same trajectory as the last couple of years from the number of redundancies that have already happened, then potentially we're going to peak in 2026 in terms of the number of people being made redundant. So this is something that's still building on. It's not receding at all in any way. And why redundancies are happening. The drivers are actually very consistent across the data. So there's three main areas that the companies fall into. It was either companies running out of funding or failing to raise. They are restructuring, often to preserve cash and extend that runway, but equally UK site closures. So that's made up a percentage as well. So what's important here is all of these companies, they've not, the majority of them haven't actually failed in terms of the science. It is pure funding and the money side of things. So they've had strong pipelines, they've had strong teams, there is good science happening, but they just couldn't bridge that gap between early stage funding and then where the next round is coming from. So it's not about individual company performance. It's more, points to something that is maybe more structural in how we fund, but also how to scale biotech maybe in the UK as well. And what we don't see and what's coming next. So now the figure, as I said, it's 3,000. That's the floor probably number, not ceiling. And around half of those people I spoke to couldn't necessarily share numbers. So a lot of the people that did vote on my poll, I reached out to them, sent them messages, tried to arrange a conversation to find out more in terms of how many people, the reasoning. A lot of people have signed NDAs, had settlement agreements, so there's a big legal risk. And that's playing into a picture of how can we really see what is happening, what is the total number of people. So a lot of companies, can make redundancies quietly. They don't need to be reported. And people, I'm finding, are moving on quietly. A lot of people as well are looking abroad to other opportunities of what there. But what concerns me more is sort of more what's coming next. I'm already aware of a lot of companies who have told me, they only have runway left to the middle of this year. A lot of companies only have runway left as well until sort of maybe late this year. So I feel that there will be another wave of redundancies and a mass sort of exodus if we're not careful. And then the 2026 redundancies of what's happened so far, people are coming to me all the time to say that they've been made redundant. They know that I'm collecting this data now, so they're sending it to me. Obviously, we've had Evotech, that's 300. Bicycle, I've been told that that's 86 there. There's been 60 at Signature, 50 at GSK, and then there's other companies that I haven't yet been able to get numbers from. So, as I mentioned, it's having a huge impact. There's over sort of almost 500 people already this year that have been made redundant, and as I said, that's going to grow a lot. And the pattern of these hasn't changed still. It's still restructuring, funding pressure, and UK consolidation. So they still fall into those three categories. So again, this pipeline of redundancies is still very much live. I feel that a lot of people come to me looking for answers, and I really hope that we can have a really good discussion today to see, where we go from next, and to stop, we're repeating the same pattern year on year. So yeah, I will hand over to David.
Thanks, Natasha. I think you've really highlighted something we're seeing already in the chat. Is it's kind of, yes, we talk about companies not working and financing, but this is personal. This is affecting every individual, and I think we really have to collectively, as a sector, get our shoulders to the wheel and pull together where we can on this, and get those who can help to help. So I think you set the scene well. You're going to give us all the solutions now, so that's how we solve it.
That's a great point you just make, Eddie. A lot of the funding is late stage. Eddie's just put a comment in the chat, and a lot of the funding's late stage. There was the 1.2 billion yesterday for J2, and that's all late stage. But I'm just pointing out, Tony, that's a good point to be made. Sorry, David, on you go.
No, thank you, Matthew. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is David Montgomery. I'm the founder of PM Life Sciences Consulting. We set ourselves up with a view to supporting small companies to commercialise in the UK and beyond. And quite quickly, I think my colleague Shuli Borkus and I realised there was a little bit of a problem that we'd maybe been slightly immune to or blind to when we were in bigger pharma. And we were noticing this challenge of funding, and having met Natasha and others. Natasha, thank you for the work you do in this. It's incredibly important to not think about just the cash and the numbers, but actually the people behind it. we realised there was a real challenge. And my sort of background, I've been a medical director all my life. I'm a doctor by training, but I've done a lot of policy. And so whenever I see a picture like this, I think, is this what government is intending to achieve? And it can't possibly be. So I then think, is it because we're missing a policy issue here, or is it because something's going wrong in the implementation of policy? So next slide. So we recently wrote a policy paper where we went and we looked at what's been written by government, what governments are trying to achieve, or it's published that it's trying to achieve in recent times. And the question of whether we think that's likely to address the issues. So UK government has placed life sciences right at the centre of its industrial strategy. It's committed substantial public funding and positioned the NHS as a global platform for research, innovation and investment. And they published recently the Life Sciences Sector Plan, which set out a number of really clear ambitions. And the ambitions sit squarely within the government's wider growth mission. So really importantly, this is central, not just to Life Sciences Sector Plan, this is central to the government's economic plan, the long-term growth, if you remember David Cameron's expression from back in the day, which seeks to translate public investment in science into productivity, high-value jobs, long-term economic return from the UK. And the life sciences sector is really intended to be a scientific strength and a driver of sustainable economic growth. And we're seeing kind of the opposite in the numbers. So what was the ambition? So the life sciences sector plan set out 6 levers. So realising a health data research service, they put £600 million behind that, but it's to become self-funding by 2035. Slashing trial setup times to under 150 days. Okay, is that likely to attract or help and sustain small companies in the UK, or is that largely about big pharma? Backing globally mobile manufacturing into the UK with a £520 million fund. Streamlining regulation and market access, a joint aligned NICE and MHRA review, introducing low friction procurement, and then finally partnering with industry to drive growth and innovation, including explicit support for 10 to 20 small companies. So it's a fascinating set of 6 vehicles with which to achieve the ambition. Some of them, I would argue, are unlikely to move the needle very far, and the others are unlikely to move the needle for UK life sciences very far. On the right-hand side of the slide are the 2 measures by which we'll judge success, so that by 2030, the UK will be the leading life sciences economy in Europe, and by 2035, the 3rd most important life sciences economy globally, behind the US and China. And we question, I guess, we argue that achieving government's expressed ambition might distract us from ongoing failure. It's entirely possible that we would achieve both of these things and see these 2 economies, US and China, accelerate away. So entirely possible we could achieve the long-term outputs in the life sciences sector plan and actually still shrink as a sector. And that should give us pause for concern as to whether these are the right objectives. Next slide. So we wrote a paper recently exploring the relationship between ambitions and government investment plans. And we argued that despite the stated ambition, current policy design and funding allocation are failing to deliver the objectives. The UK remains a global leader in discovery science and early research, but it's underperforming in commercial clinical trials. It's struggling to retain and scale UK headquartered life sciences companies. And we're systematically exporting high-value intellectual property and long-term economic returns overseas. We've already heard from Natasha about the ongoing recruitment crisis in graphic detail. And I guess we've suggested that the core problems isn't not a lack of intent or headline investment, but the structure of public support, among other things. So we think UK life sciences policy is over-optimised for upstream discovery and for servicing large multinational pharmaceutical companies, while providing limited, fragmented and unreliable support for domestic companies at the point of greatest vulnerability, that transition from preclinical development into early clinical stage. And this is a stage at which capital requirements rise sharply, execution risk is high, delay or uncertainty forces premature sale or relocation. And in a system that treats all sponsors equally, multinational companies can operate flexibly, but UK small and medium enterprises bear disproportionate risk and have disproportionate impact. Next slide. There have been a number of recent reviews that talk about this. This is a really good one. It's about funding into the university sector by Tony Hickinson at NCRI. And again, he points out the major funding gaps in the system, pre-incorporation, pre-seed, seed, and scale-up. And next slide. And then amongst it all, we're really chasing industry investment. So this is a really interesting set of analyses. Actually, there's a couple of builds. If you just build the next two builds for me, that'd be great. This is a report by the ABPI. So we've been spending hundreds of millions of pounds in the last little while chasing the results of, or chasing the recommendations of the O'Shaughnessy report. James O'Shaughnessy, Lord O'Shaughnessy, former health minister, health advisor and health minister, wrote a report into what it would take to retain and re-attract large pharmaceutical companies into the UK. And we spent a huge amount of money, maybe 600 million on the recommendations from the O'Shaughnessy report. But what we see here on the left-hand side is that the number of clinical trials has continued to fall despite all of that investment. Sure, we've made a recovery from the COVID sort of collapse, but the long-term trend from 2015 down to 2024 still remains low. And even more terrifyingly, on the right-hand side of this slide, this is the number of patients recruited into commercial clinical studies in the UK. So despite an almost 40% increase between 2023 and 2024 in the number of trials, taking us back to where we were on a declining long-term trend, nonetheless, it was an increase in trials. Despite that, there are still overall fewer patients going in. So we've spent huge amounts of time and energy trying to attract back major international investment and not really succeeded. Next slide. And we know this is UK biotech financing. So on the left-hand side, this is from the BIA report that was published recently, an excellent report, really recommend reading it. 2024 was better in terms of the long-term trend, but there's 2025. There was something like, I think, 1.9 billion went into UK biotech financing, almost half of that into two companies, most into late stage, and in amongst it all, less than 40 million from grant funding. And you can see, now, I know UKRI is undergoing a bit of a restructure and a rethink, but nonetheless, you can see the trend in terms of grant funding, UK government support into biotech in the last few years. So I think we've argued that there's been a bit of a lack of clear focus and a lack of clear achievement. And since the O'Shaughnessy review, lots of money's committed, but it hasn't attracted inward investment. And the reality is that some of that is a consequence of the healthcare system being in a really difficult situation and at the same time flooded with academic studies. One of the other things that we've not really looked at in these slides and I haven't talked about is the amount of money that we're currently putting into early stage discovery type research. That remains really critically important. The UK is excellent at it, but it's disproportionately high spend and is also probably duplicated by a large amount of charity spend. And the consequence of that is also that about 1 million people go into research in the UK into the NHS a year in largely early stage academic discovery research. Only 4% are going into lucrative commercial clinical trials. And so performance and costs continue to lag behind equivalent markets. We're seeing huge growth in China. Global participation in Europe is down by almost half in the last decade. And we have this real disconnect, I think. So what do we recommend? It's worth reading the paper. I can't do it full justice here, but I think the sort of overall recommendation for us is that government has to decide where it wants to focus. There is money in the system, but it's not clear what we're trying to back. I think we need to have really tangible metrics of success with ambitious and which are ambitious and are underpinned by guaranteed growth. So not position, but actual size of the share. We would also argue that someone needs to be given annual progress targets and be accountable. To my title at the beginning, is this a punt into the long-term grass? So 10-year targets that no one owns are meaningless. I said before we opened, we haven't had a prime minister win a majority in an election in this country and then lead his or her party into the next election since Tony Blair in 2001. So 10-year plans in the context of that kind of political volatility are meaningless. And we as an industry, and I guess that's a kickoff for today, we need to decide what it is that we need in terms of tangible support that's going to genuinely help the UK bit of this sector grow. And we need to find a voice to demand it of government.
Thanks, David. That's
Right, let's remove my spotlight. There we go.
Yeah, thanks, David. I think Mona Lisa will bring the panel back onto the pin screen in a bit as we get into this. But I think Natasha and David have set the scene really well. You know, this is the impact we're seeing here and now. This is maybe some of the historic and current moves that aren't correcting that. But then we've got some more of the passionate group on the line. So I thought maybe I'll ask Matthew, Dave, then Simon to introduce themselves, but maybe give their take on why you feel we've got to this position as you do introduce yourself, and then just lead into that sort of rounding on from the presentation. So Matthew, if I come to you first.
Hi, my name's Matthew Fife. I'm currently Chief Scientific Officer at Outrun Therapeutics, a Dundee-based biotech company. I've been affected by the ongoing biotech funding crunch. I get made redundant at the end of 2024 from Storm Therapeutics, which was a very successful company, an absolutely excellent company, which had a clinical asset going into phase 2. It worked with Signature, with a UK biotech, to get another preclinical development candidate in record time. So a really, really successful company. Unfortunately, though, the company didn't bring in the money that would allow it to keep on with clinical development and maintain discovery research at Cambridge. And unfortunately, as a result of that, despite a phenomenal track record, and doing things very, very cost effectively as well. That's another thing that's very important to talk about. Storm has now closed its Cambridge site, and the assets are being developed in the United States, and even some of the assets may go no further. Even though I can see Helen Harrison on the these are really top notch assets, and they may just end up getting lost. So I think we've got here as a bit of complacency, to be honest. When I joined the pharmaceutical industry and the biotech industry in 1999, we had every major pharma had UK companies. You had Novartis and Horsham, Merck at Terlings Park, Pfizer and at Sandwich, AstraZeneca, Charnwood, etc. And all these have gone. And I think we were okay because there was still CROs and there was still biotech companies in the 2010s. So a lot of these closures happened in the late 2010s, in the late 2000s. And I think we were okay in terms of jobs because biotech accommodated that, and CROs have accommodated that. But now this funding crunch that we've seen over the past 3 years, since 2023, is really just showing how challenging a situation we're in now. And it used to be that big pharma and CROs, big CROs, trained people as well, trained them, had training courses for people. Who's going to do that now? If Evotec's closing down its UK site, who's going to do that? So I think this is something else that's a really important issue for us to think about. And the BIA has a life sciences jobs plan, which is being led by Kate Barclay. So I think we need to start thinking about what we as a group can ask for and request. And obviously some of the things that Tony might be talking about is a shift to more digitally based tech bio rather than biotech, wet biotech. I don't think that's going to be completely possible, a complete switch over. I don't think a virtual cell is likely anytime soon. Maybe we understand 10%, 20% of biology, but biology is really complex. So I think a wet component will still be needed. So really, like David highlighted, we have to tell government about this. And I actually started getting this group together. It was me that brought them together, and it all started when there was a panel talking about the ongoing crisis in UK biotech redundancies, and Natasha's shown the numbers, 3,000. If that was Jaguar Land Rover or Tata Steel, the government would be coming in to pay £1.5 billion to sort it out. They're not doing that just now, and that's a function of the fact that a lot of the redundancies are 6 here, 8 there, and nobody's publicising it. But it adds up in the end to 3,000. And I think Dave Graham pointed out yesterday, when Pfizer shut in 2011, that was big news. That was, I don't know how many it was, Dave, 800 people, but that was on BBC News. That was big news. This latest loss of jobs, not from pharma sector, but from biotech and CROs, is going largely under the radar. You might see big things like Evotech, 300 people, but a lot of it is underneath the radar, and that is what we really need to highlight this to people in government, people at the BIA, to try and indicate because we are in danger of losing this. China didn't exist in 2011 when Pfizer shut, or at least it was just CROs. They are now doing innovative drug research, providing compounds that are being sold for a lot of value. So we've got to up our game in the UK as well. And like I think David pointed out, we have an advantage. We speak English. We are relatively cost effective in comparison to our American cousins. Although maybe we don't want to call them cousins at this moment in time. And we don't have biosecurity like China has. We don't have this big, what happens if biosecurity becomes a big thing in America, says we don't want any more work with China. So we've got some advantages. We've got a track record. We've got a history of success. Penicillin, all the way through ibuprofen, all the way through amlodipine and Viagra, to olaparib, to modern cancer therapies. They've all been discovered here in this country. So we've got a great track record. Humanization of pembrolizumab, the biggest drug just now on the market. So we've got a lot to advertise. But I think at this moment in time, complacency is leading us into a really dark place at the minute and I know so many people that are unemployed looking for work, and it's a really, really tough time. And I think we need to get this message across to government, because if it was, as part of the life sciences sector plan, the objectives are, as David pointed out, not really that stretching. We're always going to be behind China and America, so they're not really that stretching. So we really need to push ourselves further, and we need to let government know, and we need to understand as a group what skills are we going to need as well, because technology is changing all the time now. AI is becoming more and more prevalent. It's not going to be a panacea. I mean, I saw yesterday in Nature, they're saying now a new disease first invented in 2024, that's now being shown as a real disease by an invented disease in 2024 is now being shown as real by AI. So there's a lot of worries there as well. So yes, it's really just a call to action. So I'm just going to finish, Tony. Sorry, I feel like I've been ranting on for a while. So I'll finish off now, Tony, and yeah, pass back to you.
We'll come back. No worries. Dave, I think just picking up on that, I mean, you posted a thing about Pfizer and the change there and the attention given. I mean, where do you feel we sit now then? What can we do? I mean, Matthew said about amplifying this by that collective, look at how many jobs there are if you put them together. By then, I mean, you connect with so many in the industry here, Dave. So what are you seeing in terms of why isn't it more visible?
You're saying I get around a bit, Tony. So for folks that don't know me, just in case, Dave Graham, and I actually work as the industry advisor for life sciences and health sciences to the UK Innovation Corridor, which is London, Stansted, Cambridge, it used to be called. I kind of got into doing what I do now, actually having worked in big pharma for 30 years, and then being at an event sometime in the mid 2010s that talked about the number of jobs in this industry that could be created in the corridor. So I actually worked for a time at Invest Essex doing inward investment. Was fortunate then to visit Boston in 2018 for bio and actually met a lady who's called the $1 billion lady. You know, she was given $1 billion to make stuff happen in Boston after other industry had disappeared. They had academia, they had the hospitals, they didn't have the pharma industry there. And that was a collective, to come back to one of the points David made on his closing slide. You know, this was non-partisan. This was saying it was a 50-50 public and private fund. Susan, just go and make it happen. And that's what she did. She went and got stuff done. And all that the government did, I would say to that, was to oil the wheels and let her do her thing. Sadly, in the UK, that we're not good at that. The government will produce prissy, you know, here's a nice target. Nobody accountable. You know, when I first started working at Invest Essex 2016, Public Health England was destined to be relocating to Harlow into an old GSK site, starting in 2022 and ending up in 2025 fully operational. You know, I actually met the chair of the current UK Health Security Agency last year, putting up a slide that said, you know, the whole project, 17 years in the planning and another 13 years in delivery. That is ridiculous. And that shouldn't be happening in the country.
Volumes. Yeah, I think it seems to be a great knack of finding ways to help us not to do things. But it's sorry, Dave, you any more you add?
No, I was going to leave it there and just, you know, allow people on the call to come in as well after Simon.
Simon.
Hi there. Yes. Okay. Hello, everybody. I'm Simon Leonard. So just a few minutes on me. So I have spent the last 30 years in a career that started really in academia, but then moved quickly into biotech and ultimately pharma. So I recently, just over a year ago, left AstraZeneca. But going back a little bit, actually, what I think is really interesting is that my sort of epiphany or you know, main moment in my career was actually when I left a postdoc position in Cambridge and joined a small Cambridge biotech company called Cambridge Antibody Technology. And what I learned straight away was the challenges that small biotechs were facing even in the late 90s, and particularly in areas that were associated with how you drive performance and achieve your goals, but also at the same time are able to develop the partnerships you need and ultimately get the investment that enables you to continue to grow. And Kat certainly at that time, you know, certainly faced challenges and difficulties and certainly nearly went under a few times. And what saved us really was, I think, the quality of the leadership in the company at the time in getting the partnership deals that we did with Big Pharma at the time, and enabling us to really continue to build and validate the technology and actually get the first drugs that out of discovery and on their way to the clinic. I think overall, you know, what I've learned in the last year since I left AstraZeneca, because I had the opportunity to really immerse myself in the ecosystem. So having learned a great deal from the science and from the level of the lab and the science and the platform development itself in multiple leadership roles through science and corporate development and drug R&D, what became apparent to me very quickly was the extent to which UK life sciences and UK biotech is struggling. And my ambition actually has always been, and which is what I'm now executing, is really around driving and supporting the ecosystem, taking everything I've got and learned back into the ecosystem to both apply that directly in supporting founders and startups, but also in helping to build and support the ecosystem itself. And so what I've learned from talking to so many people over the last 12 months and as a result of that, where I feel part of the biggest struggle is for us in the UK is that the UK doesn't, you know, and I think we'd all agree, the UK is probably still one of the most innovative countries in the world, and actually does not necessarily have a science creation problem, if you will, but I would say it does have an execution, scale up and leadership infrastructure challenge. And that's where I think part of where we should be focusing now is to really drive what I see as a practical ecosystem intervention model. So there are multiple touch points that ultimately I think will deliver the change and the solutions that we're looking for, that enable us to convert the world-class, UK science into investable, scalable companies. And that ultimately creates the jobs. And then how do we keep those in the UK? And so, for example, a few thoughts on that from me are that part of the challenge that I've seen through mentoring and consulting work that I'm doing is not so much about the scientific credibility or technical credibility of the innovation that's happening in life sciences and biotech, but it's more about the ability of inventors to become effective CEOs and actually turn their companies into investable propositions that then interest VC and big pharma partners to the point where they want to do the deals and actually provide either the non-diluting revenue through the partnering, but also the ongoing investment. The other thing that I did also in just going through and just referencing the UK life science sector plan was that that David mentioned was when I went through that, I also saw what seemed to be some very big gaps about what was missing in providing early seed to Series A stage funding, and actually recognizing that there needs to be an infrastructure solution that is national as well as local in the UK that actually drives support for founders, but also creates a national infrastructure for how we fund and drive the development of those companies in more of a, to be more execution focused, to make themselves partner ready, to make themselves investor ready, and actually attract the funding that then enables those companies to retain and scale, and actually then of course keep the jobs in the UK. I think the other factors, of course, that we are seeing in terms of what is driving the redundancies, such as, of course, the global capital, situation and how that has been very conservative and tight over the last few years. And I've certainly heard in the last 12 months while I've been out, how many times over the last year everyone has said, oh, it's going to get better next year. We are going to see more money coming through. How do we unlock that funding pipeline? Is how do you actually make UK companies and UK startups more attractive to VCs and family offices, et cetera, on the basis that you're de-risking and providing the support that those founders need to become truly effective CEOs. The other
Simon, can I ask you a question, Simon? So one problem that you talked about, innovation. UK has no problem with innovation. The problem is we have no money to do innovation nowadays. And we need to generate a track record of success. And so we're not, when you see UK raises, you're maybe if you look in the LinkedIn, it's 5 million, maybe 10 million max. If you look in the United States, 100 million, 120 million. So we've got a real problem, and I totally agree with you that we need money, we need a plan. I mean, and we've got a so-called plan with Mansion House and pension funds coming in.
Right.
But if you look, even those pension funds, I mean, the British Growth Fund last week was 200 million, the British Business Bank, but that's not much for drug research across 20 companies. And the first company, they haven't put the first 8 million into life sciences research. The first 8 million they put their money into is an autonomous car driving company. It's something that's going to give them revenue quicker. So to my mind, capital is the big problem they have, and that is the root of it all.
It is.
Sorry, Simon, sorry for interrupting.
No. It's a great point, because I think this is where what was missing from the sector plan for me were national framework elements that actually, and I go back to the point about, David, I think you made about having annual objectives versus a 10-year plan, because you're absolutely spot on. Governments change within that time frame. Everything gets shifted. Everyone backs up on what they'd agreed, previous government had agreed. So actually having some kind of non-political or non-government based national body that actually controls, to your point, Matthew, a level of investment in UK innovation that actually is then driving and supporting the infrastructure itself is what we need. And that's where that, a national biotech incubator or venture studio network linked to leading academic or NHS centres, something that actually is owned outside of the normal political party structure on the basis that it is actually there in perpetuity. So it's constant, and you're actually then able to ensure that the money's coming in and going out and being funded in a way that is both enhancing the regional innovation zones with specific support, but also driving the national collective and hookup in a way that then means that you're able to drive that lobbying, and decision-making approaches in government that actually are providing that funding. And so I guess what you could say is that what I've seen in the 12 months I've been out is lots of pieces of a puzzle that actually need to be put together, and someone needs to put them together. And it doesn't seem to be the government from what I've read in the sector plan. So who is it? Is it BIA? Is it, Innovate UK? Is it somebody needs to pick up that baton but be supported by the government in actually being able to do that with the funding? And then you have the ability to join together what I see are the three key areas: the founders, the investors, the VC, and the group I've not mentioned, which is people who are out in portfolio careers, seasoned professionals who have left pharma, have left other companies, and this is deep tech, biotech, whatever, who actually then, as part of that sort of holy trinity, are bridged together in a way that actually is enabling that framework to really drive the sort of innovation and support that we need. I think the other factor is, of course, that pharma companies are increasingly, looking for the cheaper outsourcing models. So part of the redundancy situation is fueled by pharma's relocating significant numbers of roles to cheaper geographical locations. It's as simple as that. So how do you actually, encourage pharma not to do that on the basis that they're actually going to get something different in terms of a different benefit from keeping the roles in the UK, and actually through the access to the greater sort of talent incubator that is the national framework? Could that be enough to actually try and shed that tide? And the last point I'll make before I shut up quickly is I think this China consideration is twofold. One, we're never going to compete on cost, so we shouldn't even try. I think the fact is we come back to quality, we come back to leadership, we come back to the skills and the historic ability of the UK and the entire infrastructure of the UK to generate true innovation, that actually becomes how we differentiate versus a cheaper cost-based model.
I'm conscious time is whizzing away here. David, if we can try and keep some shorter comments coming in.
Yeah, very, very quickly. You miss a couple of really important elements for me. I mean, everything you said, I completely agree with, and the coordination, but it's really important. But you missed another important component of it, which is the charity sector. So for me, it is about coordination. There's actually quite a lot of money. UKRI has a huge amount of money. The charity sector is spending a huge amount of money on stuff in the UK in the healthcare space in terms of research. It's duplicative and it gets in the way sometimes. So again, the charity sector's money is all going into early stage for the most part. I spent 18 months as head of research for Prostate Cancer UK. A huge amount of early stage clinical discovery, huge amount of government money going in there. It's swamping the NHS with trials that aren't building treatments for patients necessarily. And so pharma companies don't want to come and do their research here because they can't recruit very quickly. So you get into this vicious cycle, and it is going to require, I don't think it's one person, but it is going to require ABPI, BIA, government, AMRC, the Association of Medical Research Charities. It's going to require everyone to come together and say, right, do we care about Parkinson's disease? Or do we actually care about Britain being a success and giving us the infrastructure and the economic prosperity to solve some of these medical challenges? I really worry about the lack of ambition, not just in the sector, but at a government level for what Britain could and should be.
David, can I ask,
Totally
so your UKRI point, I'm not in total agreement with you. I don't think there is a lot of money from Innovate UK, and biotech companies in particular are really struggling. There was a recent biomedical catalyst, and I think over 370 applied. 24 have gone to interview. And I think I've spoken with one of the people going to interview. Of that, they're expecting 6. So 6 out of 370 something getting a grant. That is very, very challenging. Another problem is that a lot of biotech companies with limited runways, you need to have a grant funding that's going to go ahead for 2 years in advance, because you've got a project to go ahead. You've got 12 months before you'll get the grant, and then you've got to have another 12 months. So to get money in the first place, you have to have money. And that's a problem that biotech companies have, that they don't have that runway in order for them to get Innovate UK grants. So it's a real catch-22 for biotech companies.
I'm not suggesting for a second that there's tons of money being given to biotech, but there's a almost £40 billion 5-year settlement for UKRI. That's a decent chunk of money. In amongst it all, 500 million of that is going towards scale up of life sciences companies. So yeah, I agree. The fraction of the settlement is tiny, but that's a choice thing.
They
could double the money available and not even feel it.
One biomedical catalyst is £25 million, which is to be split up maybe between 6, if you're lucky, well, maybe 6 to 10 companies. So maybe 2.5 million, maybe 2 million each max. That doesn't touch the sides, because generally you need 15 million to get a candidate. So we're really, I think we need more money, non-dilutive as well as pension money. Sorry, Tony, I've interrupted you again.
That's right. I'm just conscious that there's never enough time to talk about these, and this is hopefully the start of a conversation. But something came up in the chat box earlier, and I want to come back to Natasha a little bit to pick up on it. I think Eddie put in about we have to accept we're going down a route of AI, automated labs, and therefore where does the UK position itself against the likes of China or elsewhere? I mean, you're dealing with people who've built their CVs, they've built their qualificator, got experience. And my experience of scientists is they always pick up new techniques as the science changes. They're bright people, that's what they do, and they just evolve. I mean, is there a real gap, though, if we think we're going to be dominant? Because TechBio is where the money's going as well at this point in time, if it's going anywhere in the early stuff. So what's your sense from the people you deal with in terms of how they see themselves developing?
When I talk to people, the appetite is really there for them wanting to learn and move into new skills. People that I'm speaking to every day, they've been made redundant. They're not resistant to learning AI tools. I think they are aware that is where the future is. There's a lot more in terms of the computational methods, data science. They want to move forward with those, but I think the problem that they're finding is they're finding it hard where to access that. The cost involved, especially in that front. So, there's a lot of people who have been out of work 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. They just don't have the funds to invest into a course or to upskill. So that's what they're finding really difficult at the moment. A lot of these people have used their whole life savings just to keep by, over the last 12 months because they haven't had a good severance package. So the idea that they should then, individually and equally, the cost that they've had to go through their educations to become scientists in the first place, and then they need to kind of invest more into retraining to help others. So I feel that there's definitely an appetite for it, and what could help those. I think about this a lot of how can we help these people in the skills, but a funded biotech skills transition program potentially, that's industry designed, not as academic, but something that is maybe a short course, 6 to 12 weeks, where they can learn and develop skills and be placed into opportunities at the end, I think could really help. But yeah, I think there's a lot to be done there, and there is an appetite for it, and people want to learn. I think they just don't know what is available, where to start. They see as well all these adverts to become AI trainers. They're training AI using their scientific skills on contract roles and being paid per hour, purely because they can't find full-term roles. But if they could, apply themselves to a course and learn those skills, then yes, certainly that's something that they'd be really keen to do.
And I do feel that's a really important element from my perspective, because I think there is this important piece of work that Kate Barclay's leading at the BA on the sector skills strategy. I mean, I've been involved in a number of the skills group regionally and feeding into others. And a lot of those skills groups regionally are they're sort of sector agnostics. They did look at all of them. But it's such a focus on entry level apprenticeships at generally lower levels. And I get that they need to get people into the workplace, but I just feel that we've sort of assumed once somebody's got a higher degree or been in the workplace, they don't need any help anymore.
Yeah.
And I think we've got to start, if we don't look after the high-end jobs, there aren't going to be any lower-end jobs. It's just the way it is. That mushroom works that way. So I think we need to see some real clear pathways for people who are keen to evolve and stay involved and move with the industry, but they've got to be supported to do that financially and practically, I think. So I think that's a really important thing, which I kind of hope feeds into that skill strategy, that it isn't just about entry level and moves on up the chain. But I'm really conscious that like I said, we could talk for hours about it. They're really, really important things. I'm not trying to dismiss any of these things. We could talk with any bullet point for so long that I've circulated earlier for the group. But I'm just thinking, I'm hoping we can reconvene this group, and I'll drop another idea towards the end. But I guess if I go around the group now on the panel, and I guess briefly, is case, what should we do next in your view, and who do we need to do something? I mean, I'll start with the fact I think it would be great, A, to keep this community going and the conversation happening and ideas and staying engaged. And maybe there are things we've talked about as a group about an open letter into government or whatever. So there's lots of people here really concerned about this. So as a sort of a practical step. But then, I mean, I'll come to you first, Matthew. What would you like to see happen next, and who do you think needs to do it?
I would like to make the government aware of what is going on. Like you say, Tony, there is a lot of publications saying there's money coming into biotech. Unfortunately, there's a lot of have-nots and only a very few haves. And like you say, it looks very different outside. Babraham's pretty empty just now, so we need to get the message to government that this is super, super serious. There are thousands and thousands of people who have lost their jobs because of this biotech funding crunch.
David?
Politicians are relatively simple and extraordinarily busy people. And I worry that you go with a problem, you don't necessarily get a solution. I think we need a very, very clear set of recommendations that are relatively straightforward to implement, with a clear understanding of the consequences to the growth agenda of not implementing them, and a clear understanding of the upside of doing so.
Who leads that, David? One Nucleus, BIA?
I think BIA have sent out a questionnaire recently. We would love to be involved with One Nucleus. I mean, I think doing it by questionnaire is difficult. I think some sort of workshop Delphi procedure where you bring people together and actually really hash it down into something really, really tangible, I think would be incredibly important.
Sorry, David.
No, carry on.
Okay. Dave, your perspective?
I think I'll just go along pretty much with what David said there. It needs to be pretty hard-hitting, getting a group of people together to really boil something down into what the asks are. But also, there's been a few things in the chat around what happened to the Mansion House reforms. Just where is that at, and what's the action that's really needed to unlock that?
Well, that was the 200 million. The first 200 million was just that's the first of something.
First bit.
But it's first bit, but it's not great, and it's not all life sciences.
Okay, Simon.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everybody's comments so far. I mean, I think the only thing I would add is, and to build a little bit on what Natasha said earlier on, is I do believe, as I said, in all of the little puzzle pieces that I've seen since I've come out, and one of a big set of those are actually all of the skills that are already out there in every aspect of what we need in the UK to develop innovation, but also to scale the companies. And so I go back to this concept that I actually don't believe the government should be responsible for the framework of how we develop innovation and how we develop biotechs in this country. But if we are able to create and pull everyone together in a way that creates a national biotech founder development initiative, for example, that is funded by the government, yes, but it's not decided or led by the government, then you have an incubator and accelerator presence that actually brings the people that Natasha are talking about into the fold and actually helps them understand not only how they can learn the skills they need to add to what they've already got, but also can contribute nationally into that incubator accelerator framework. Join the dots, I think, is my message.
Gotcha.
Yeah, I think, if everybody can start to speak with one voice and work collectively rather than against each other, I think that really matters now. Equally, when it does come to the government and policymakers, data, if you don't go to them with data and evidence, then they're not going to take notice anyway. So I think it's about kind of getting the data, getting the evidence, but then also, like David mentioned, about then what do we do? With solutions as well. I think it's tying the whole thing together, but working as a collective, and bringing everybody in, so everybody, is aware of what's happening and is talking off the same page.
Thanks, everyone. I would agree with all of those things. In terms of whose job is it, I said at the start, no, One Nucleus, we're not a lobby group, and I think that's a specialism in its own right. But I hope by trying to knit some of this and join dots and get the volume of the message and the awareness up, it will make it onto the to-do list for the BIA and others to really take in with that message. If we're going to deliver on this sector plan, then please listen to us as an industry. I think, David, you made a really important point about going with specifics. Don't make it difficult to work out. If we can say, here's a solution for you, we just need you to get on with it, or at least not get in the way, then I think that's really important as well. There's nothing I would have disagreed with what any of you have said on this. From a One Nucleus perspective, we're just really keen to keep this as a live conversation and gaining momentum. And I think it is a UK issue. I think it isn't about whether it's a London or a Golden Triangle or a Northwest. This is a UK thing, and we need to solve it as the UK. I mean, I really like the idea of the national accelerator, bio-incubator type thing. And actually, it sort of resonates with the Tony Hickson report, where he found, there's hundreds of accelerators. And yet the investors are saying we're not seeing the quality opportunities that are there because they're lost in the noise.
Exactly.
I just think a national kind of relatively independent clearinghouse type system where the elite ones were being put in front of investors and partners that could take them through whilst everybody else is learning in that process. Because why didn't they get through last time? Well, that's a selection process, but everybody learns from going through these things. I think it's a shame if we just say we only want to go somewhere where the answers are what we want to hear. Exactly. So I'm really taken by that idea. I think that's got merit as well. From our side, we'll circulate the recording of this and we'll capture the comments and try and distill some of that. David, sorry.
Yeah, just before you close, Tony, just a question, bring it back to Natasha, who kicked us off with the people. I mean, I've been reflecting, if any other industry was going through what we're going through, of course, you'd be having a conversation about how you fix it, but there is also a question about the people and the individuals and the isolation. Do we need to do more to provide support and a network for the group of people who are struggling at the moment? I mean, it's not something we can solve now, but it's maybe something we should take offline and think about.
Yeah.
Is there a framework for providing the support, the training, the mentorship, the companionship? People are sitting at home, they're going to DWP, they're lonely, you get into depressive cycle. I think there's something more we need to do about the people.
Completely agree, David. Yeah.
It's something from our perspective, we kind of looked at what we operate as a not-for-profit, so there's a limit to what we can do and resource without the help of others, but we're happy to try and convene where we can. So we do One Nucleus. So if companies are making staff redundant, those staff continue to benefit from the company's membership benefits of One Nucleus whilst they remain members in that year. Because I just think it's important that people stay engaged. They come to the network meetings or sessions where they do meet people who can say, they might bump into Kate from BIA and say, oh, this is a support available if you wanted to go down. But the pathways aren't obvious sometimes if you happen to meet the right person. So keeping people engaged, I think, is really important. David, coming back to your point about coming up with specifics, one of the things that it'll go live on the website as soon as mechanics can get it set up. One Nucleus had a networking dinner planned for the 14th of May at Chesterford. I think this is a really important and pressing conversation to keep going. So we're going to reconfigure that into more of a working dinner. We can have 100 or around there or just over people at it if we want different tables. And with the help of this group here, and then people come into that dinner, we can subsidize and absorb the overheads. We'll have to make a bit of a charge to cover things like the food and stuff. Otherwise, I'll go bankrupt and the board won't be happy. And neither will the members, frankly. But I'm really keen that we use that as a dinner where we have specific questions to talk about at the tables over dinner, feedback, and come up with some specific things that we would like to go into government, and then maybe take those to BIA or whatever the route is to say, please, can we champion this? And move that conversation along in a very impactful and specific way. So we'll circulate all the details of that to the group, and I hope we'll see a lot of people engage in this. If people would like we do more of these so that we can pick on maybe one of these topics, it's such a huge thing to solve. But if we pick on one topic, we're more than happy to run these webinars as long as people are happy to come and speak more knowledgeably and sensible than I can about the sector, because you're the experts, not me, frankly. But we're happy to try and provide that support. I'd like to thank the panel for sharing their insight, like everybody for tuning in, all the comments, and we will revert back to you. But for now, I'll close it off. Thank you all for your time and see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony.
Okay, bye.